Okay, so let's discuss about Sheridan CAD standard. Standards are very important and they are able to standardize or create a same look and feel for all the drawings in an office. So if you become a CAD manager, a Revit manager, you will be managing the standard for that particular architectural engineering office. So we want to do something similar while you're studying. So there are layer standard, color standard, dimension standard, drawing standards, and all that. For this particular PowerPoint, you can find this under your uh, homepage tab. So you can go and click on, let's see, yeah, content, under the content link, uh, week 3. So under week 3, you'll see there the Sheridan CAD standard. Likewise, we have the plot style or CTB file standard. So you might want to download that as well. Okay, so let's go back here. So one of the standards that you'd like to be looking at is the layer standard. Mostly the settings for the layers, how you name them. The shortcut key for the layer command is LA. So LA, you get this nice dialog box palette. Okay, so that's the layer properties manager. You can create on the new button here or Alt N to create a new layer. Now, when you create a layer, you have different properties or settings for that layer. It can be turned on or off. It can be frozen, freeze, or thaw, right? They work very similarly, but if you freeze and thaw, what happens is that the layer is not anymore red. So the database is like it's not there. On and off, sometimes it's still being read or the data is still being read. Now, why was this created? Back then, computers were really slow, and you actually need to freeze a layer so that the data or less data is being read by the computer. So if your computer is slow, freeze and thaw is really good. You can lock a layer so it doesn't get touched. You can't edit it. You can change the color of the layer, which is very important. Colors allow you to create different line weights. So I'll talk about that later when we talk about the different colors for the different layers. Now, line type. So the layer, any item placed in that layer could have a certain line type. So it is determined by the layer. Now, all of this can be overridden. If the property of the element, the line, the curve says by layer, it means any of the properties here will be will define the layer status or the element status. And then there's also the line weight, right? For some architectural office, they will set the line weight standard here. So a thin line, a thick line. But that is not really the most efficient way of doing it. The more efficient way of doing it is by doing the line weight by color, which is sometimes, you wonder how and why. Well, the color can actually have a particular line weight. And the nice thing about this is that if you have a different plot style, let's say, for example, 1 to 100, then yellow or white could have a line thickness or line weight. If you change the plot style to, let's say, 1 to 20, then you would like to change the uh, thickness of that particular line because it's bigger, right? So you want it a little bit thicker. Now, if you are changing it by line weight, then you have to keep changing it each time, or you might have layers for a different plot scale. So I go around to get around that. You simply change the plot style which I'll show you later, which is the CTB file I was talking about earlier. So you could have a thin uh, plot style used for scales that are, for example, 1 to 100, 1 to 200, 1 to 150, and have a thick plot style, well, let's say at 1 to 20, 1 to 10, and you're not changing the line weight anymore. So maybe that sounds gibberish for now, but I'll show you later. Okay. And then you can turn the plot off. That means if you don't want this layer to print, you can see it, but it doesn't print. So just click on this. This is for the new BP layer or viewport layer. So things can be frozen in paper space or the layout tab, right? Specifically certain layers, because you will have different uh, viewports in paper space. So you might want to freeze some of those layers. So the command is layer, LA, and if you press F1 and type the command, you can actually get a documentation of what that command is all about. This is how I learned AutoCAD. I really, we printed the documentation. Back then, we didn't really have a lot of books about AutoCAD. So I learned a lot through this particular documentation. For Sheridan Standard, this is how we name our layers. We start with, let's say, A for architectural, and then the next two letters will be, let's say, A01 for the ground floor, right? It could be any of this, right? And then for the next letters, it will be the description of what that layer is for. So in this case, wall. Okay. Now, so A01 dim, A01 FDN, right? And then it will have a specific color, specific line type, and of course, what are the entities that you normally place on that layer. Next is color standard. Color standard. So what color do you use for the layer, right? For example, if this is a grid line, so that layer could be A01 grid, color is gray, and it's used for grid lines for annotation, objects, tiles, ceiling grids, right? This is a thin line or very thin line. And then red, we use this for assigning this to the layer for annotation, right? Dimensions, grid line, and green for object lines, which are thin, right? So it's a little bit thicker than the very thin gray color. Then we have white. This is for annotation for small and medium text sizes, or magenta, right? These are for the objects, medium lines like doors. Now, take note, there are different settings also for floor plans and elevations. So it can be a little bit confusing at time. So we'll focus on floor plans initially, and then what do we use for elevations and sections. That will be a different standard. And then thick like blue and yellow for large text, or object lines like thick lines like walls, columns, right? Floor plan outlines. You want to emphasize them. That's why you want them to be thick. And then for very thick lines, we use cyan. So here we have, for example, a wall that will be yellow. It's a thick color. And then for this one, oh, by the way, that will be in the A01 wall layer. And then this one is for our lines for the windows. So you have here a little bit thinner, like a medium thickness line. So that will be magenta. And then this here will be green. Now, all of this assembly will be part of the A01 win layer. So A01 win layer will be magenta. So how can you make this green then? Well, the magenta will be the property of that in terms of color will be bilayer. The thin line, you need to override it. So you need to select these two lines right here and then change it to green. And the reason why we place this different line thickness is because you're actually cutting a window, and when you cut through the glass, right, you want it to be thick to emphasize that. These two lines right here, the green or thin line, those are the lines that are showing the frame or representing the frame right here. But you're just seeing it, you're looking down and you're seeing it. That's why you want to de-emphasize that. So green. Now the walls, right? You want to emphasize that. That's why you want it yellow. Okay. Okay, so here are some graphical standards. And without the line weights, if you don't use line weight, the drawing will be flat. So it's always nice to learn how to communicate by drawing. So drawing CAD is a language, right? So you can see clearly or better with the line weights. Okay. So outline walls with heavy line weight, outline cat elements, window frame, door frame, with a medium line weight, and draw edges of elements shown beyond cutting planes like windows, doors, in a, I think, light uh, line weight. So these are examples. Okay, that brings us to plot style. So in CAD, you can go to your layout tab. So let me go to CAD. Okay, let me start a new drawing so it doesn't confuse us. So you can go to the layout tab and right click on it or type page setup. So you can access the page setup manager by right clicking on the layout tab. Again, hover over the tab, right click and say page setup manager. And then you can modify this. You can change it to a particular printer. So let's say I'll just say print to Microsoft, print to PDF. And then you can say 11 by 17 tabloid size. Okay. And then millimeters if you're working with metric, or inches if you're working with imperial. So we're working with metric, so we'll use that. We say 1:1, that means print the paper in full size. So this is the paper, not your drawing. So this is not the scale for your drawing. This is the scale for printing the paper. So that's 279 millimeters by 432 millimeters versus in inches 11 by 17. If you compare the two, right, they're both 11 by 17. Now, here's where the plot style is. So you want to select Art CTB. If you do not have Art CTB, there are two ways of doing it. One is you can create your own, new, right? Start from scratch, next, and then name this arc. Okay. Now I'll just going to name this arc N. So because I do have the arch already, right? Next, and then finish. That's how you create a CTB file. But then you need to edit that CTB file so that it is equal to or the same as the standard. Okay, so you click this, and then you can change the, let's say, the color, right? Color means when it prints, right? Remember, it's a plot style. When it prints, what color do you want this to print? If you want this to print as red, then you say use object color. You can say red and print it as yellow, which is weird, right? But normally, we want them to print as a black. In CAD or architectural drawing, most of our drawings are printed in black. Now, we select colors 1 to 7 and change this to black. Okay. Now, color 8 can also be black, I suppose. And then the rest need not be color black. You may or may not, but there's an advantage for changing this or not changing this to black. And I have a PDF file here. So these are the different colors, and you can access this when you select the color, right? Now, the beauty about the different colors not using black is specifically this printout here. Normally, laser printers print or doesn't print color. So if you say use object color, so 9 will, when you print that, this is the shade of gray that it will print out, which is really beautiful because what's going to happen is that colors 1 to 8 will print as black, and the rest can have different shades of gray. So you can use this for, your hatch patterns. So it's a bit de-emphasized, so it's not really dark. So there's like a transparency to it. Okay, shadows, right? So you can use this for, creating different shades of gray for shadows, for, maybe trees, right? Things that you want to de-emphasize. So this is really a good way of having being able to show depth in your drawing, not just by the line weight, but also by the grayish scale or shades that you can use. Okay, so now, and then, so let's say these are all, these are all black, right? So all of these are black. And then the next thing that you'd like to change maybe is not the line type, but the line weight. So let's say for red, you can assign here the thickness, which we have for red based on the Sheridan standard. So let me show you those standards. Let me go back to the PowerPoint, right? So these are the colors. So red, black at 0.13, yellow, black at 0.5, okay? And so on and so forth. So all of these colors should be black. So I've shown you how to do that. And then for ArchCTB, red will be 0.13, yellow will be 0.5, green will be 0.13, cyan will be 0.7, blue will be 0.5, magenta will be 0.25, black or white will be 0.25, and then color 8, gray, will be 0.05, very thin. Now, see, you can create different plot styles. You can create your own. Here's a Sheridan standard for thick plot styles. So arch thick, right? Notice that by simply changing from ArchCTB to ArchStick, now red will print at 0.25, yellow will print at 0.7, green will now print at 0.25. So you use this for bigger plot scale, like again 1 to 50, 1 to 10, okay, and so on and so forth. Okay. Next is text standard. For text standard, right? These are the line weight or line or text height, text height for each of the scale. So if you're using full scale 1:1, these are the height of the text for small notes, medium notes, titles that are small, or titles that are large. So that's for Imperial, and this is for metric. Now, 2 millimeters for, again, full size, right? Drawing, 3 millimeters, 6 millimeters. Now, in today's CAD, right, when they introduce annotative scaling, so this is non-annotative, meaning say every time you change the scale, you need to change the height of the text. So that's why you need to place the text at the end when you are already informed on what scale to use. But even then, sometimes you change the scale. So with the annotative style, right, you always use the 1:1 dimension so that your text will always print at a particular height. So if I, change this, right? Sorry, uh, you actually, how did we get those numbers, right? You get the scale factor. For example, 1 to 100 scale factor is 10, right? So 1 meter is equals to 1,000 millimeters. Divide 1,000 by the scale 100, then you get your scale factor. It's really complicated, and this is what we used to do before annotative text style was introduced, right? So you have different scale factor for the Imperial, similarly, right? So you need to multiply, use this as the factor to change the plot styles. So the height of the text will change based on the scale. Again, can sound gibberish or really confusing. What I really like is the annotative, right, text style. What does this mean? Well, this means that what your text, a particular text, will always be printed at that height, even if you change the scale. So 1 to 100, 1 to 50, 1 to 150, your text will always print at that same height. Now, that means if we go back here, uh, all you actually need is, and I would, maybe change this, and let me just, okay, format this picture and say, just to emphasize this is all you need, right? The full scale value, okay, which is beautiful. For annotative style, you always use the one-to-one dimension. So you can actually just hide all the rest, okay, which is beautiful. How do you do that, right? How do you do that? So we go to annotative scaling, and the command for that, or sorry, you create a text style. The command for that is st. Okay, so go back here. Let's uh, let's save this and close. Okay. Okay. So the command for that is st. Okay, st, and then you select your font name, and then you click on, or you create a new one first, right? So you can say this is your Sheridan standard, Sheridan text, let's say, or whatever you want to name it. Click OK, and then make that current, and then make it annotative. For font, I like Arial or Simplex or City Blueprint. Okay. Now, when you are using your fonts, or the fonts, when you're selecting the fonts, try not to put so many font styles, right? So, City Blueprint, right? Or Simplex, type S. So, Simplex or Arial. So, currently we have, well, let's use Arial here. Okay, annotative. Now, paper text height, just say 0, right? So that each time you create a text, you can assign a height. If you place here a value, then it will always be for this particular style, it will always be that height. So 0 allows you to change it as you enter the text. Okay, and then width factor, make it a little bit taller by typing 0.85. So it looks, a little bit taller versus if you say 1, right? So it's a little bit more spread out. So I like 0.85, and that's our standard. Okay, so you apply this and close. Now, how will this work? Well, let's say you apply a text. The command is t text. Now, you want to set the scale to initially, let's say 1 to 100, right? And then click OK. And then click make a square and type your text. Of course, you want to be in the A01 text layer. But I'm just going to go here, open this so you can see. So there's my Sheridan text standards, which is selected. Now here, this is for the text height. So I'm going to change this to, let's say, 3 millimeters. So 3, enter. Now, don't worry if your text became too big or too small, but that's 3 millimeters. I'm just going to type here, uh, all caps, let's say, Sheridan, okay? And then click on Close Text Editor or click outside, okay? And then Z, space bar for the zoom command, E, space bar for extend. So there's your Sheridan text. Now, this one is at scale 1 to 100, right? So it could be at scale 1 to 150, okay? And it changes, right? So why is it changing? Well, because it is annotated. Now, let's see, at scale 1 to 100, if I type DI, that's for distance, this text is about 300, right? About 300 in height. So that's 3 millimeters at 1 to 100. Okay. If you change this to, let's say, scale 1 to 50 DI, this text now became, a little bit smaller, about half of that, 150. Now, you might wonder, well, what's happening here? Well, let's go to the layout tab. So here we are in the layout tab. Remember, in the layout tab, this is 1-to-1, right? 1-to-1. So escape, and then let's create a line here in paper space. So we're in paper space. You know you're in paper space if you see this triangle. So I'm going to create one line in paper space and then offset this by 3 millimeters. So 3 space bar. Okay. So that line is 3 millimeters apart. Let me double click and go to model space and say zoom space bar, E space bar to zoom to the extent. And now we don't see our uh, text, right? So what's happening? I zoom to the extent and I only have Sheridan here as my drawing and nothing is showing when I zoom extent. Supposedly it should fill in this drawing. Well, turns out you need to click on show annotation objects at current scale. Okay, and likewise add scale to annotative. Okay, and then you say Z, enter, E, enter, and there it is, right? Now, let's change this to 1 to 100. Oops, look at that. It is now showing us the Sheridan text at 3 millimeters. Let's change this to 1 to 1 to 1 to 50. Wow. Notice that it actually, it's not, this is now showing 1 to 50, but it resized itself to show the height of the text at 3 millimeters. 1 to 10. Okay, there you go. It's resizing itself. And why do you want that to happen? Well, texts are always drawn. If you draw on a piece of paper, the text is always drawn at the same height, 3 millimeters, always, even if you change the scale or plot scale. So you change this to 3 millimeters, or you don't change the height of the text, even if you are changing the plot scale. So that's the beauty of annotative. You don't have to change the height of the text or the scale factor. Okay, so even if you go back to 1 to 100. Okay, so just remember, right? Make sure you turn these two buttons on, and then you can check by creating a uh, two lines. The distance between is the distance of your text height. Okay, so that's layers and text. Next video, I'll show you about how we set up our dimension style.